Well, hi there, folks. I'm Dara Star Tucker, and this is The Breakdown. Thank you so much for joining me here on KJLH, where we sit down once a week and we talk about the issues that matter. If you want to find me online to talk about these issues where we can really stretch out and have our say, you can find me on Instagram at Dara Tucker B. You can also find me on the KJLH Instagram page at Radio Free KJLH. That's on Instagram, but I'm also on Threads and YouTube and TikTok, all other social media platforms at Dara Star Tucker. That's Dara with one R and Star with two. Well, this week we are back to our analysis and conversation, our discussion around the election and all of the aftermath of that. Things happen at a very quick pace these days. You think you've digested one bit of news, and the next thing you know, we're on to a completely different, I want to say hellscape, but I'll say landscape. We're on to a completely different reality. So even from last week, we have so much more information that has come down the pike. I know I'm still processing. I'm still working through what has happened. I've gone through many stages of grief. It has not been linear, I'll say that. It has been circular. It's been all over the place. It's taken all kinds of forms. And today I would say I'm probably at a place of seething rage. And so that's where I want to start with the guest that we have today. He's someone, if you listen to the program regularly, then you might recognize his name. Mr. Gerard LeConte is back with us. Thank you so much for joining us, Gerard.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I wish we were talking under better circumstances, but I'm always happy to get a chance to chat with you.
So, Gerard, before we get into this conversation, can you let the people know where they can find you online?
I am Gerard.LeConte on TikTok. That's GerardLeconte. You can also find me at Gerard LeConte Politics on Threads and Instagram.
Gerard, there are very few people that I would rather be having a conversation with now in a time of such uncertainty and difficulty. There are very few people that I would rather lock in with than you right now. I've been watching your Threads feed and a couple of the videos that you've put out post-election, and I really just appreciate your measured point of view. And, we're all sort of reacting and spouting off and popping off in all sorts of different ways right now. And even people whose voices I respect, a lot of them, I'm kind of questioning some of the messaging that's going out right now. And I'll even say that I've put up some emotional posts in the wake of this decision, this election result, some stuff that I'm sure I'll look back on in 6 months and go, man, I was really kind of heated. But I'm questioning a lot of the messaging, which we'll get into. But I appreciate your attempt at least to create a balanced approach to what it is that we're dealing with right now, which can be very scary. It can be very confusing. And we're just not sure what to make of things, what to say. I have a lot of questions for you, but I appreciate your approach. Where have you landed post-election? I mean, take me through your process since we got the results back. What has this journey been like for you?
Yeah, I think it sounds like we've had similar experiences, emotionally at least. I think I did probably a day or two after the election manage to get to the acceptance stage of grief, but then I quickly rounded right back to anger. And I
Right.
felt very frustrated and very upset and disappointed and angry with not only the outcomes, but the shape of the outcome. What the electorate ended up looking like has been difficult to swallow, but also parts of the reaction has been a little bit frustrating too. But I think where I'm at in all is just there is a point at which we need to just think carefully about the idea that we were willing to elect him. And to a certain extent, parts of us were very eager to elect him. And as much as we would like to make excuses for whose failures or whose inadequacies allowed for his election, ultimately he needed to get the votes to win. And he did get those votes. And we kind of have to come to terms with that. I think one of the things that's been difficult with the fallout is it seems to me that a lot of people are very slow to just come to terms with the idea that the electorate was perfectly okay electing a person like Trump after the campaign that he run and on the platform that he ran on. And if we're kind of skipping past that point, I think we're going to come up with some insufficient explanations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, one of the things, at least in the immediate aftermath of the election, one of the things that was frustrating me, and one of the things that I felt like you have handled well, is kind of putting the issues of race and gender at the forefront, and at least understanding that whatever analysis that we provide, obviously we know that that's not the total story, but the fact that we are so willing to skirt by how those things impacted this race and how gender impacted the race with Hillary Clinton. Obviously, the election with Joe Biden was a little bit of an aberration. I don't know if I even want to use a word that strong, but it was a COVID election. There were extreme circumstances that were at play there. But I think it's hard to deny the impact of race and gender. How do you feel that that's been handled in the media? Are there people that have been kind of landing at a place that you could line up with, link with? Are you disappointed in how that's been addressed in the media?
I think the media has been predictably disappointing in talking about this aspect of it. The gender aspect to the outcome of the election has two sides. On one hand, we would be foolish not to ask ourselves what implications this outcome has for the country's willingness to elect a woman, and specifically a woman of color. I do think that it will be a while before we are able to adequately parse the role that that played in the outcome, but
Mhm.
I think it would be foolish to say that it didn't play a role at all. And it obviously played at least some role. But I think the bigger role that gender played is the extent to which Donald Trump leaned into men, and more particularly white men, political identity. I think one of the more disappointing aspects of the media reaction to this that I've seen is that there's a lot of recrimination of the idea that Harris was leaning into identity politics. And now the theory goes, I hope Democrats understand that identity politics just doesn't work. Well, I
Mhm.
mean, I think that that's a very silly way to think about this, because Trump was very explicitly participating in identity politics.
Yes.
It was just an identity that the media tends to be very comfortable treating as the default identity.
Mhm.
And if you are pandering to the default identity, I guess it's not identity politics anymore. It's just speaking to the people, quote
Right.
unquote. So I wish that the media was capable of having a more nuanced conversation about that. And more importantly, I wish the media was more capable of having a nuanced conversation about the fact that it turns out identity politics centered on white men look like the campaign that Trump ran. And
Mhm.
that is a unsettling indictment on the American character. And it seems like that's getting lost in the broader discussion. I hope it's not permanently lost in the broader discussion. But if this wasn't a big enough alarm bell that we are in a crisis of masculinity in the United States of America, I don't know what will be.
Mhm.
And one of the things that makes me nervous about our own coalition is it seems like a lot of people are sort of doubling down on the idea of, see, we told you men are broken, and until they fix themselves, we're always going to be stuck beholden to the patriarchy.
Mm.
Instead of thinking, how do we figure out a way to build a coalition that helps fix this problem? That conversation I haven't seen start happening quite yet. We're more so just talking about which person we can give a podcast to attract men. And I
Mhm.
think that just loses the forest for the trees.
Mhm. I remember us having this discussion. I think it was probably the last time you were on. We were having this conversation about men and boys and your concern with how they were being spoken to, with how they were being really marginalized and really not included in a lot of conversations that were being had around particularly progressive politics, and how, as you said, they were being maybe referred to or treated as broken. And we're using terms like toxic masculinity and not really addressing or cultivating a healthy masculinity at all. And so it would seem that those chickens are coming home to roost at this point on the left, because they really have been, men and boys have been ignored. That's part of the process that I've been going through in the last few days, is sort of evaluating my media diet and who and what I'm listening to and what are the conversations that I'm a part of, and evaluating how I can expand my understanding of where we are right now, particularly with men and with boys, in a way that allows me to understand the real conversation that is being had around that, the conversations that need to be had, what that demographic looks like, how they need to be spoken to, without then also being pulled into the whirlpool of right wing, red pill, problematic bro
Mhm.
culture, because I don't have a tolerance for that. So that's the challenge that I'm facing right now.
Yeah.
Because if we are going to face this issue and understand what it is that we are dealing with, which I've seen it and I've experienced this being online. I mean, if you are a social media content creator, you're going to encounter this malevolent force of young men and boys who are really just siloed off in their little corners of the internet. And when they come out to do harm to people like me. And it's my experience with a lot of online bro culture has just been really negative, frankly.
Mhm.
And so I'm asking myself, how do we start? Yeah, I've heard other creators and commentators making comments like, okay, who's the Joe Rogan of the left? And there's a lot that's been made of this being a podcast election, that podcasters have been extremely influential and were extremely influential on a large portion of the electorate. If you look at the top 10 podcasts right now, political podcasts or news podcasts, 8 of the 10 are right wing. They're people like
Mhm.
Tucker Carlson and Bill O'Reilly. But yeah, I think those of us who are on the political left are missing a lot right now.
It it was really frustrating for me because, like you said, we were having this conversation before the election,
Mhm.
and, first of all, I commend you for creating space to have the conversation because it's not an easy conversation to have. And I think that's like step one. Is it was pretty frustrating for me, and I had to put in a non-trivial amount of like emotional work to not express how frustrating it was in the immediate outcome of the election. How many people reached out to me personally, and I don't fault any of them individually. If any of them are listening to this, I hope they don't think I was upset at them individually, but reached out and said, have you considered doing a podcast? Because my reaction was, hold up, we cannot be telling men that the solution to this problem is more men with podcasts after we've all been spending 4 years hearing that the problem with the world is that there's too many men with podcasts.
Mm.
Like this is a serious issue. The fact of the matter is, if it is a literal and very popular meme in our coalition, no more men with podcasts, you cannot be surprised when our coalition does not produce men with podcasts.
Mm.
Like we have been enforcing the idea that this is not a space for men to talk about stuff that men are talking about. I'm not saying that like men have a right to that space or that that space needs to come at the expense of any other identity in our coalition space, but we do have to be honest with ourselves that we have prided ourselves on that space not existing in our coalition.
Mm.
So we almost treat it as like, how do we figure out a way to go find the men? It's like they're probably here
Mhm.
already. It's just that if you are a man in our coalition, you know that the third rail that you do not touch is men. Like we
Mhm.
just like do not talk about any issue within the context of how it affects men in particular, or else you are opening yourself up to a bad time. I think really what we're talking about here is the confusion on this issue within our coalition between justice and retribution. And it's way too many folks within the coalition are talking about addressing the patriarchy within the context and with the tone and with the emotion of retribution and pretending that they're seeking justice. Uh,
Mm.
Most of what I've come to know as feminism is through the teachings of the bell hookses of the world. And what bell hooks teaches is that the first victim when a man is being indoctrinated into patriarchy, the first victim is that man's own self. The first person that experiences violence is the man himself.
Mm.
And unless we are able within our coalition to recognize that men can experience social justice problems, can experience issues that are particular to them, even if they are also experienced by other identities, there's never going to be a space here. At the end of the day, the only reason why men flock to those podcasts is because they know that they do not have to worry about messing up. And people might think that that's a fragility among men that they need to get over. Fine. But this has been the outcome. At the end of the day, if you are only willing to hear from men who are willing to come to the coalition from a default perspective that we should be embarrassed and ashamed of our masculinity, then that's the only men you're going to get. And you can't really be surprised that that's a minority of men. So I think really when we ask ourselves these questions about, who's the Joe Rogan of the left, there is no Joe Rogan on the left. But there might be a space for men on the left. And the only way to ever really allow that space to form is to literally just be okay with it being there. And we're not okay with it being there right now. We're okay with it being there on terms that those men don't set. And if they don't get to set the terms for their own space, they're going to go somewhere else. I think it's just like I think that's a relatively natural outcome. And frankly, it's also the outcome that built the coalition that we have today. It's just for not for non-men, you know what I mean? So I ultimately, this is the coalition we asked for. We're now experiencing the one side effect that we are realizing now is a bit of a liability. If we want to be able to counterbalance it, we simply just have to create a space to talk about some things that men are dealing with without taking it personally. And also, frankly, this goes for men and otherwise. I think women, people of all genders and identities experience this problem within the progressive coalition, the broader left of center coalition. We have to be okay with people making more mistakes. Everybody is worried about whether or not only does the message need to be perfect, but the messenger has to be perfect. The message and the messenger has to be not offensive to everybody. And we just have to be okay with the idea that that person's favorite might not be my favorite, but that's okay. We have to go forth and plant a million trees, and hopefully we can have a forest that competes with the broader right-wing ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, in the spirit of that, I listened to someone recommended Scott Galloway, and what I ended up finding was an interview that he did on a podcast called Diary of a CEO. And I will admit, it was a hard interview to get through. There was a lot that I didn't agree with that he and the host had to say, but it was like I'm sitting in on a conversation that I normally wouldn't. I wouldn't force myself to kind of make it through a conversation like that, where there were many, many moments where I wanted to jump in and say, no, but, listen to this. No, this is where you're wrong. This is where this conversation should go. And as you're saying, there were a lot of things said in that conversation that if you were to put it through the filter of progressive voter, it wouldn't pass muster. There would be a lot there that would be criticized and, oh, those guys they're problematic. And this is why we just sort of toss them aside and just give them the big red X, and they don't get a seat at the table, even though Scott Galloway himself said he voted for Kamala Harris. So he's not someone who necessarily considers himself conservative. A lot of it is, at least for me now, forcing myself to at least listen and take in a perspective that I normally would not allow myself to take in. Now, I'm listening to what you're saying and wondering if a lot of this conversation could then be transplanted to a conversation around race. I mean, how much correlation is there with race when we're talking about allowing men to speak, allowing them to have their say, allowing them a space? We obviously know that racism and misogyny played a role in why many people, I always tell people to ask themselves, do you know of someone? You're not going to poll for people necessarily who would say, no, I would never vote for a woman, or no, I would never vote for someone that's Black, or a Black woman, which is really kind of a third consideration. Would I vote for someone who's Black? Well, a lot of them voted for Obama. Would I vote for a woman? Well, maybe a lot of them voted for Hillary. Would I vote for someone who is both Black and a woman? That's kind of a separate question, that misogynoir issue. So we're not really asking the question, would you ever vote for someone who is Black and a woman? And if we did, we probably would not get back accurate polling, because how many people would really admit to that? Do you know someone who would be unlikely to vote for Kamala Harris because she's a person of color, because she's Black, or because she is a woman who is also Black? And most of us probably know someone, one or
Mhm.
two, at least one or two people that we
At
would
least
say,
reservations, even if they wouldn't say that's the reason.
yeah, yes, we all know someone who's like, that dude probably not, you're going to have a hard time getting through to him. So we know that it has an impact, but it's not necessarily something that can be polled for. It's not necessarily something that can be measured. When we think about the conversation that's being had around how to expand the conversation with men, does the left also have a similar issue with, well, I hate to say it, with white people? Is this coalition hostile towards white folks, or at least white folks who are not able to have these honest conversations around anti-racism and white supremacy? And, you got some folks who are very open to that. And you have a lot of white folks in this country for whom those are very difficult walls to breach. And so is there a similar problem that exists around race?
Yeah, so I do think that the coalition is now really propelled in a lot of ways by white women. And what I learned, and I hope we've all learned, is that white women are not immune to white fragility.
Mhm.
It struggles with white men because there's a lot of white
Mhm.
women who struggle with white men, right?
Mhm.
So the whiteness is pervasive in our coalition now in a way that it wasn't, I don't think, 6 years ago. But I think to answer your question more holistically, I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm going to go back to what you mentioned with Scott Galloway, because I think it's an inroads to what else you're asking, because I really do think the question here is actually what's the intersection between masculinity and race as it pertains to Black and Latino men, because that is really where we saw a lot of sliding happening. So I used to listen to Scott Galloway quite a bit. I used to listen to him and Kara Swisher quite a bit. At least for me, there's always like a point at which you've heard enough hours of a person that you understand their answers to everything,
Mhm.
and you don't really need to listen to them that much anymore. So I don't listen to them as much anymore. And I mentioned Scott Galloway on Threads recently because I did identify him as somebody who has been talking about these issues, whether in a way that we would prefer or not, within our coalition for a very long time. And I specifically did it by identifying Kara because she has protected the space for her to do so. And I do think that that is really necessary within our coalition. That being said, Scott Galloway, on a very regular basis, says things about gender that I do not agree with, and
Mhm.
oftentimes says things that I find objectionable. And if I was on this podcast with him right now, we'd talk about those things. That being said, I also understand that he is still an on ramp for some people out there that don't find those things as objectionable as I do right now. And this comes down to one of the real systemic problems I think our coalition has when it comes to gender specifically. We are risible to the right wing about the idea of bootstrapping, right? When the right wing talks about economic bootstrapping, I don't think they really care about that anymore, because apparently if it's inflation, like, somebody else is supposed to take care of you. You don't have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps anymore. But anyway, in general, we think it's silly, this idea that you should just have this individualistic approach to economic success. And you cannot consider any environmental circumstances in that endeavor. You should just pull yourself up by the bootstraps. We think that's dumb until it comes to masculinity. As soon as it comes to masculinity, that's exactly what we expect people to do. Pull
Mhm.
yourself up by your bootstraps. We are not going to consider anything about your environment, anything about your upbringing, anything about the broader ecosystem in which you live. It is up to you to fix this problem of yourself. Do not come to me about it. That's exactly how we feel about masculinity. And I think we need to practice what we preach when it comes to masculinity in the same way that it comes to rights, liberties, pursuit of happiness, prosperity, etc. And the thing that we've done that I don't think we've noticed is we've put a lot of Black and Latino men in situations where they walk into the coalition, they walk into one of our spaces. It's very clear to them very quickly that they are prone to messing up based off of how they talk about things. And they also know that in this situation, their race is not going to protect them. It is not going to give them the benefit of the doubt. They are going to be a man first, and they are going to fall on their sword as a man first. So why not just go to the place where they don't have to be so careful,
Hmm.
right? So, like, we are asking these people to choose between how they view their masculinity and how they view their race. They're not making that choice on their own, right? So I think, like, The reason why it's important to think about the Scott Galloways of the world is within the grand scheme of things, it would be better if more men were like Scott, right? In the grand scheme of things. But within
Mhm.
our coalition, we so badly want people to have already come to the right answers that we are more offended by the things that he says we don't like than we are grateful that he's saying the things that we do like. I'm not saying that anybody owes Scott Galloway any gratitude, but all I'm saying is like, if there was a spectrum of Scott Galloways, there would be much more on ramps for people to take where they didn't have to feel like the time they spend in our coalition spaces are spent walking on eggshells, and it's not and they don't um, have as many opportunities to go deal with the Ben Shapiro's of the world, right?
Mhm.
So I think a lot of times, like, I heard a lot of Black men talk about trans issues in leading up to this election. I know for a fact that the ad that Trump was running that said, therefore they, them, not you, resonated with Black men. I am not saying for a moment that our coalition should stop thinking about trans issues, but I do think our coalition should think about the fact that we validate trans issues and we do not validate men's issues. And
Mm.
that's why they felt that way, right? It is not
Mhm.
necessarily because they have animosity towards trans people. Some of them do. I'm not making excuses for them. But it absolutely is the case that trans issues are more welcome in our coalition than men's issues. We are living in a world right now where, regardless of how they got there, regardless of what created the condition, boys are not learning to read at the same rate as girls. Boys are not going to college at the same rate as girls. Boys are not graduating college at the same rate as girls. Boys' incomes are falling behind girls. There are more single men. The age distribution between single and coupled men and women is completely out of whack. These are things that if we saw these disparities among race, we would say we have to figure out what's going on here.
Mm.
But
Mhm.
because it's on gender, we just don't care. We tell them to bootstrap it. And I'm sorry, but if we're seeing a plummeting rate of literacy among boys, that's a serious problem. And our coalition should be very interested in addressing it. And they know that we're not. They just know that we're not. So I think like we just have to have a everybody wants the Democratic Party to be soul searching in the outcome of this election, and they definitely should. But I also think our coalition's doing a lot of soul searching too, because we think that we're the coalition of a broad spectrum of people, when really, like, in practice, we're keeping a lot of people out.
Mm.
And I think, when you mentioned listening to Scott Galloway and not liking it, nobody is saying that anybody in the coalition has to like any of these people. Don't
Mhm.
listen to them. I barely listen to them, right? But it's okay if somebody else does.
Mhm.
That's the big thing that the right got correct in building their ecosystem. They don't care if anybody is upset about what anybody is saying. They talk crap about each other all the time. It's one of their favorite things to do,
Mm.
but they don't kick each other out. And we do it all the time.
Yeah. And that's the way that I ended it. I said it's one of the reasons that it's so difficult to coalition build on the left is because we are so exacting. We are so scrutinizing when it comes to people's exact stance on issues. We don't really leave a lot of wiggle room. And if you mess up, there's a lot that's been made of cancel culture and all this stuff. And to the point that I'm just tired of hearing some of those terms. But I do feel like by nature of what the left represents, the idea of coalition building is just a harder prospect. I'll transition into the next thing that I kind of want to focus on, which is my frustration with how the coalition did break apart quite a bit with this election cycle. Another factor that had a huge impact, or probably had a significant impact on turnout, was the issue of Gaza. And I've addressed that many times on this show. But there were protesters that drew a red line and said, this is the line I can't cross. Genocide is a line I can't cross. I cannot support Kamala Harris. I can't support anyone from that administration. I feel I have always maintained the position that you have to vote your conscience. I'm not here to try to convince someone to vote for someone that is morally repugnant to them, especially when the issue of genocide is at play. But I think what exists on the right is, I don't know, it's an ethos that says there is room for everyone. If you are of the mindset that we are, then there's room for varying opinions within this broad spectrum.
It can't be as liberating.
Exactly. And there are lines like that that exist on the right. There are, and I think we tend to look at them as this amorphous group.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, these are all just racists. Oh, they're all just sexist. They're all just whatever they are. But when you listen to a variety of voices on the right, as you're saying, they disagree with each other all the time. They're not Republicans or conservatives because they necessarily agree on everything. There is a lot of variance in belief where there just doesn't tend to be a lot of room for that on the left, which is a huge area of frustration for me. Because for a long time, the main issue that drives at least the religious wing of the conservative party was Roe v. Wade. And George Bush didn't do anything to alter that decision. Ronald Reagan didn't do anything to address Roe v. Wade. Neither did Gerald Ford or Richard Nixon. And there are a lot of people I remind people frequently that I come from a very religious, very conservative background. And for a lot of them, that is a modern day genocide. That is the way that they refer to it. Abortion for a lot of them is that red line. Yet a lot of them stayed faithful to that party to the point that they have now elected a thrice divorced felon who has been found liable in a civil court for rape. I mean, we can run down the list of all the transgressions that Donald Trump has committed that have absolutely nothing to do with what Christians profess to stand for. But here he is acting as their representative and getting them a lot of what they want.
Yeah.
Is there a lesson to be learned from the way that those folks have operated?
Well, I think it's important for us to not give them too much credit. I see this happening all the time. Like, the only people that think that Trump is more capable of doing anything he wants more than Trump's base is progressives, right? Like, they're like, how many, I don't know if you've dealt with this, but I had to put on my last post that if anybody comments that we're not going to have elections anymore, I might just block them. The defeatism is out of control.
Yeah.
But really, all Trump did was modernize the Southern strategy. And what it turns out is that in 2024, the Southern strategy has appeal that stretches out of the South. It's now just the rural strategy, and the rural strategy has a lot of appeal to people who live in suburbs too. He just rebuilt the Southern strategy: protect Christian white nationalism, full stop, right?
Right.
Doesn't matter if he actually is himself a practicing Christian or a good Christian, but he's willing to protect white Christian nationalism at all costs. The traditional aspects of Christian nationalism appeal to reactionaries of other races. That's what turns out to be the case. So that's not like reinventing the wheel. It's not something America's never had to contend with before. And I've thought about this so much, like the shape of the turnout looked so different the days right after the election. As more votes have come in, we've been able to better understand just how close this election actually was. The turnout problem for Harris isn't as bad as we necessarily thought it was. It really just looks like 2020 was the outlier when you look at it within the context of 16, 20, 2024. And I think 2020 being the outlier can be extremely well explained by access to the ballot. Like, people were not getting kicked off voter rolls, and it was extremely easy to vote almost everywhere in 2020. That means we won. But I think if the Democratic Party were to take anything away from the results of this election, it would be that we've become disconnected from young people. And I think most specifically, we've become disconnected from under 40-year-olds. And if you look at the turnout numbers by age demo, the only age group that made up more than 30% of the electorate was 50 to 64-year-olds. That's the only age demo that he won outright. So he won the election. If more under 40-year-olds had turned out, Harris probably would have won. And they didn't turn out because the Democratic Party, they don't connect with the Democratic Party right now. I think Gaza had something to do with that. I don't think it fully explains it. I think it's more so explained by our campaign was sort of stuck in like 2008 or 12 in a weird way, Like it was built around the idea of a moderate that was stuck in 2012. It was built around the idea of a young person that was stuck in 2012. And we over indexed on how much the idea of protecting democracy or having people from Trump's party criticizing him would appeal to young people. They didn't care. They just didn't really care. If they would have been able to emphasize more things that resonated with young people, we might be having a very different conversation today. I mean, Gaza probably needed to be a part of that. She probably should have distanced herself more effectively from Biden's policy on Gaza. I don't think it's as cut and dry as many people who are activists on this issue believe, but I do think that was a really good opportunity for her to distance herself, and she did it too late, and she didn't do it forcefully enough. I also think she probably could have spent more time banging the drum about how much student debt relief that their administration has given and how much more aggressive she would be about it if she won the election. Like things like that, right? That could have, she tried to do the price gouging thing, but price gouging is a buzzword more than a policy. And a lot of the people in our own coalition, frankly, don't really know what they mean when they're saying it. There just need to be more emphasis on issues that resonated well with young people and less emphasis on things that resonated well with older white Republicans, right? Like people my age do not care that Liz Cheney agrees with you. If anything, it's weird. You know, she wouldn't have been any better off parading around with Kristen Sinema or Joe Manchin. I don't really know why she thought it was so great to be doing it with Liz Cheney. And we talked about this a little bit the last time we did our TikTok Live. I was like, I don't know if this is really going to be great for millennials, but I hoped that it wouldn't be a deciding factor. And I don't think any one of those issues were a deciding factor, but I do think overall they need to really rethink what a young voter cares about right now and how to make them feel heard and make them feel like they care about them. One of the headlines that really stung, but it was one of those like, this stings because I think it's right, is I think it was the Atlantic or Wall Street Journal or something, but it said, oh, I think it was the New Yorker. It said the Democratic Party has become the HR party. Totally true. 100% like read like a book. Totally true. And there is not a single young person in the world who loves HR. So like, you know, millennials, like that's like, okay, whatever. Millennials are the most responsible generation like ever. So that's not like the worst insult that you can call us, but Gen Z is not like us in that way. And Gen Alpha is not going to be like us in that way. And we need to rethink our idea of what a young voter is. We need to revisit what voters under 40 care about, because if we would have gotten even 2 percentage points, 3 percentage points more turnout there, there's a really good chance that she definitely doesn't get swept in the swing states. She might have won the election.
Well, I guess I'll use that as a springboard to talk about one of the other things that I want to talk to you about, which is Kamala Harris herself and the campaign itself. I noticed in the immediate aftermath of them, us thinking that it's a huge blowout, because initially they were giving numbers of like something like 15 million in the popular vote or 12 million in the popular vote. And it was like, oh my God, this has been just a pummeling that she received. And so there were folks immediately that came out basically saying she was a terrible candidate. They had run a terrible campaign. And it was very upsetting, I'll say, for me to hear that kind of analysis from a few people that I respected. And I felt like it was reactionary and it was kind of taking advantage or
throwing her under the bus.
It very much was that. It was like, well, that's easy. She's an easy target. She's an easy person to throw the blame at, especially considering that she had about 107 days to put together a campaign. My perception, and that's just, I'm having to really examine what my media diet is. And I knew that I was kind of siloing myself, especially in the last month leading up to the election. I was getting very nervous, very concerned that we might have this result. And I was driving myself up the wall. So I'm like, I'm going to stop even trying to figure out what the polls are saying. I'm not really going to be turning over to Fox News, trying to figure out how they're taking things in. I'm just going to look at content that encourages me and keeps me from having a nervous breakdown. So that was a very intentional choice on my part. I knew that I was not taking in balanced information, but at least from my point of view, she was doing very well. It was my perception that she was a good candidate. A lot of the feedback that I was hearing was that She had performed much better than expected. She certainly took the campaign from what was going on when Joe Biden was the nominee. She certainly made a lot of gains from what it would have been if he had kept it. And she infused, what the word we kept hearing was joy. She infused so much joy and so much energy. And then Tim Walz came in, and it was just, well, yeah, this is a great pairing. And there was positivity, there was optimism, there was hope. And it was just my perception that even if she didn't win, okay, I was not under the delusion that any of this meant that she was absolutely guaranteed to win, because we knew what she was up against. We know the force that Trump is. But at least if she didn't quite pull it off, my perception was at least that she did a very respectable job. But then it was like in the immediate aftermath, it was just everyone just sort of piled on with her as a candidate, with the campaign and how it was run. I was following that Kamala HQ, the headquarters account on Threads, and I thought they were sarcastic, they were funny, they were quick with the comebacks. I thought that a lot of what they did was exemplary. I thought this is going to be studied for years to come. They were putting together packages, slickly produced, After Effects and all of this stuff. And I thought their messaging was actually pretty good. I don't know, Gerard, I'm asking you, was it as terrible as what is being portrayed now in retrospect? Or are people just sort of taking advantage of the opportunity to throw darts at her and at the campaign because now this is a big embarrassment?
There's so much bias at play in the autopsies of these elections. I think there is an extremely good case to be made that, like, obviously I can never test this counterfactual, but I think if you ran the election again right now, it's probably way closer and she might win. And the reason why I say that is because I think that there was a lot of people within our coalition that still did not take seriously the idea that he could win. And if you think about the differences in the access to the ballot from 2020 to 2024, if you have stuff to do on election day and you really doubt that this clown is going to get elected, maybe you don't go, right? Treat it like the only way to think about this is that Kamala Harris lost a winnable election, right? Like, I really think that there is an extent to which people did not take Trump's chances seriously. Second, when you take into consideration the fact that all Western democracies have kicked out the incumbent party, the fact that she got this close could be seen as validation that she ran a very good campaign, especially when you combine that fact with the idea that she was the candidate for 3 months. It could be seen that she did a pretty darn good job, right? At the end of the day, we cannot avoid the fact that during Biden's presidency, cumulative inflation was 20%. People saw the prices for things go up 20%. And based off of the fundamentals, if you ask any political scientist what happens when that happens, whoever is holding the bag when that happens gets voted out. So I think, like, even based off of all of that, there is a defendable story to be told that she shouldn't even have gotten this close, right? All of that said, look, American voters have short memories, and people thought Biden's career was over when he became vice president, and then he became the president. So I'll never be the one to say that Harris doesn't have a political future, or that this is like forever tainted her as a candidate. And I'm also not willing to say that she ran an awful campaign. I think that there was things wrong with her campaign. And I think that in hindsight, if we could go back, it probably was a good idea for Biden to announce that he wasn't running after the midterms, allow time for a full primary and a full campaign, right? Like, in retrospect, it's very easy to say that.
Yes.
We can't act on that hindsight now. She might have a political future. None of us know now. We should not be as hard on her as we are being, because this was going to be a close election given the fundamentals and the economic environment. A lot is going to change between now and the next election that affect how we feel about how this election went. We're just getting a lot of reactionary opinions and responses to a really disappointing outcome for a lot of people.
Yeah. I hadn't even considered the idea that she would potentially run again until someone mentioned it. And I thought, well, there's absolutely no way, but I guess never say never. My feeling is that they will run the safest, blandest, whitest, malest Christianist candidate that
Andy
I can
Bashir, come
possibly
right on.
find.
Rip the
It'll
band.
be Gavin Newsom, Andy Bashir, whatever. It'll be a stick figure. I mean, not to say that those are not talented politicians, but what makes me sad coming out of this, especially to see two major party female candidates be beaten in this way by this particular candidate, is that it may be a long time before the electorate sees a woman as a viable option, simply because we've tried it twice now and it just has not succeeded. And that's one of the other tragedies that comes out of this for me.
One thing I will say is, if I were to make a prediction today, which again is, if this hasn't established this well enough, my predictions are not good. But if I had to make a prediction today, I would say that the next nominee is running against JD Vance, and that election will be the first millennial v. millennial election. I think the next nominee is going to be a millennial. That's about the only demographic information about that candidate that I'm willing to commit to. I think I'll be shocked if it's Newsom. I just can't imagine that we send a California liberal after what just happened to Harris.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a millennial
They
or a
just
very young Gen Xer.
skip the Gen Xers. We're
Yeah.
accustomed to being ignored.
Hey, I think Andy Bashir is a Gen Xer, so, and I think Shapiro is a Gen Xer too.
Okay,
So
that makes sense.
If it's Shapiro, if it's Whitmer, if it's Bashir, I think they're all Gen Xers. But
Okay.
I really wouldn't be surprised if it's millennial.
Okay. Yeah, JD Vance, I think it goes without saying, and that almost scares me as much as Trump.
Oh yeah,
especially after 4 years of Trump.
I'm of the firm belief that Trump is not ideological. JD Vance most certainly is. So yeah, it should scare you.
Yeah, he's a true believer and seems to be poised and ready to sell his ethics and whatever else is necessary to attain power and financial advantage. And yeah, I don't have really anything positive to say about that guy. I've done a breakdown on him specifically, and I'm sure I will probably talk more about him in the future.
I hope he stubs his toe 3 times a day.
Yeah, I do want to talk to you a little bit about your content creation. I've done some kind of off-the-cuff commentary on how I'm feeling and where I am with this. I've noticed that you've really gotten back into doing a bit of actual curated commentary on what's going on. Is that a space that you plan to stay in going forward? You're going to continue to provide that sort of analysis?
Well, one of the nice things about this election outcome is that people give a shit, again, excuse my language, but people are caring, and the engagement is definitely way up. We're going into the holidays, so who knows how long I can keep this up. But yeah, I mean, it has spurred a little bit of the creative juices. I have been spending and dedicating more time to it, for sure. I mean, one thing that I do think we will need during this time is, we've already seen it. The number one tool in any fascist toolbox is to confuse, distract, and enrage. We're going to get so many things thrown at us, like a Matt Gaetz AG appointment or a Fox News host as our Secretary of Defense. Like, remember how exhausting that was last time around. So one thing I do think will be important is somebody who's willing to just dive deep into the practical things that are actually happening, right? Like, I know this was said, there was this soundbite, there was this clip, there was this comment, but here's something the administration actually did today and what we might think an outcome is, so that folks can kind of stay contextualized with the implications of the Trump presidency. I'm also going to hopefully be paying close attention to how our coalition reacts to this election and how it continues to evolve and shape. The coalition in this election was different than the coalition in 2020, which was different than the coalition in 2016. So the coalition is going to be different in 2024 too. I want to kind of be tracking how that changes and how that evolves. We also don't know what evolving technology is going to mean for our politics going forward. Things like AI are going to matter. I know a lot of people kind of like to poo-poo any advanced technology when it pops up, because we've kind of started to associate those types of things with the right. But the first thing that happened after Trump was elected, the stock market didn't go through the roof. It did grow, but crypto went through the roof. We know that AI was leveraged pretty heavily by that campaign. Betting markets was on stage during this election cycle in ways that it's never been before. So, paying attention to those types of things, understanding what the administration is actually doing versus what it wants us to be paying attention to. And of course, looking at and exploring ways in which our coalition continues to grow and change.
How do you stay motivated, I guess, to plug in and to care? Because at least for me, as someone who has been plugged in and has very much been following this in the context of, hey, this is something we need to prevent. It's
Yeah.
really important that we not allow this man back behind the wheel. And now he's about to be back behind the wheel again. And so
Mhm.
for me, that as a creator, that's a real gut punch. And it's kind of creates this disincentive for me to invest. And I know for people who are not content creators, they're probably feeling a lot of the same thing. It's like, well, why should I care? Why should I plug in? Why do I need to stress myself out? We obviously know this is all going to start to go down the toilet. We don't know how bad it's going to get. I do want to ask you, how bad is it going to be? But how do you motivate yourself to continue to plug in and to continue to care and talk about these things? What is the importance of actually following the you know what show?
The number one reason why Trump got elected is because those people aren't paying attention. Full stop. So I can either be another one of those people or I can pay attention. And I know that what a fascist wants me to do more than anything is to become cynical and check out. Number one, the first step to fighting fascism is not complying in advance. So just paying attention is an act of resistance. It's a very difficult and taxing one, but it is one. I think when it comes to how I actually like, you're really asking about, how do you win the war of attrition? How do you maintain the stamina for this? First and foremost, hug your family, call your mom, like that's keep the people who are close to you, because it's always important to remember that our communities matter as much, if not more, than whatever the federal government does. It's really, really important to have hobbies outside of politics because they keep you grounded. I'm a pretty typical dude in a lot of ways. I play fantasy sports. I like Formula One. I have a lot of podcasts I can listen to that have nothing to do with politics, right? Have a refuge for when you're feeling worn out. One of the things that I've always relied on, because I am a nerd and a bit of a dweeb, but I highly recommend if people haven't done this before, give it a shot. I spend a lot of time reading and learning about American history. My favorite being the history of the founding of the country. I'm always listening to a biography of one of the presidents. Right now, I'm on Madison, and sometimes it's nice to like I can't listen to another podcast today, but I can turn on that audiobook and I'm still in this space. That part of my brain is being itched, but it's not being itched with the clear and present danger of the controversy du jour. And I think
Mhm.
having a hobby or an interest that's tangential to our current political experience, that can provide context to our current political experience, but isn't exactly it, can be really helpful. It can give you a little bit more fuel to pay attention
Mhm.
because you're not going to be able to do that for very long without being reminded of some catastrophic crisis that the US went through. And then you're like, oh, yeah, we're still here, though.
Mhm.
So, like, I think that helps you be grounded too. So, if I was going to stay close to your community, if you're feeling too far down, plug back into your community. That's what they're there for. Have hobbies that have nothing to do with politics so that you have a refuge for when the politics are too much. But then also have a hobby that's kind of political, but not about our exact current stressful situation. I
Mhm.
think that's probably the best recipe for not getting too down in the dumps. And if you're able, go for a walk, get outside. I know it's a pejorative these days, but it doesn't hurt to touch some grass. Play with your dog, pet your cat.
Those are all such great recommendations. And if there's one thing I've noticed a lot of people talking about, just hitting their point of they're just maxing out with mainstream news, even CNN, MSNBC, and just the frustration that a lot of us are having with a lot of the messaging that's coming out of those platforms. But one thing I do like about it, MSNBC, is that they'll have historians on, people like Doris Kearns Goodwin and Michael Beschloss and John Meacham, and people who can help us contextualize and understand that we are not the first people to go through this sort of upheaval. We are part of a long history. The American experiment is 250 years plus in the making, and we are part of a continuum. We are
Yeah.
not probably experiencing anything that generations before us haven't. I mean, obviously, this is a unique set of circumstances, but our time will come and go, and we have to conduct ourselves as honorably and as courageously as possible, because what we do now impacts what your children and what future generations will experience. And sometimes that's hard to grasp in the moment. You feel like the world is on fire
You
and
know,
you're just reacting.
Ken Burns has a quote that I love. He says, I could live to 1,000 and not run out of things in American history to talk about.
Hmm.
And I think that's something that we should remember. Pick a person, pick an event that you don't know much about and learn more about it. One
Mhm.
of the things that's frustrated me the most when I've talked to young men about like everybody's interested in what young men are doing with their time. And there'll be times where I'm like, Joe Rogan is publishing 3 hours of podcasts a day and not talking about anything. That's an audiobook a week. Like,
Wow.
just go learn something. I know you're interested in stuff. Do you not know enough about the Tulsa Massacre? Go read a book about it. Do you not
Hmm.
know enough about Frederick Douglass? Go read a book about him. Like, and nowadays with technology, you don't have to have the attention span to sit down with a book and flip pages. Put it in your ears. You're already doing it with the podcast. You're already doing it with YouTube. You know, get a subscription to PBS. I promise it's not as boring as you think it is. And these things can give you context to what's happening now without making you experience the fight or flight of the most recent scary thing that happened.
Yeah. It's such an important reminder. Well, the last thing I really want to get you to weigh in on, Gerard, is what we should be looking for as we're taking in the news, if we have the courage to actually follow along, at least generally pay attention to what's going on. What should we be keeping an eye on now in terms of the events that are unfolding before us? Obviously, we can't pay attention to everything, probably shouldn't be filling 24 hours of our day with this stuff. What's the most important thing that we should be giving our attention to right now?
Well, before I answer that, I would say that if anybody is feeling pretty fatigued by this, the inauguration is not until January 20th. Enjoy your holiday and give yourself permission to take a second. Beyond that, the thing that I'm paying very close attention to is the House. Donald Trump is doing a very strange thing where he is appointing a lot of representatives in the House to his cabinet with a very thin House majority. And one of the differences between the House and the Senate is that in the House, you have to hold a special election for the person taking over that seat. Whereas in the Senate, the governor can just appoint a new person to hold that seat. So there's
Mm.
going to be a period of time where Donald Trump has willingly elected to have an even thinner margin of majority in the House than he would otherwise. And history would suggest that there's a very good chance that he is going to lose at least one chamber of Congress in the midterms. So he already has a small sliver of time where he'll have unified government. I know it sounds scary right now, but if we remember back to his first administration, he got very little done when he had unified government in those first 2 years because he was very disorganized. And we haven't seen that much right now to make us believe that he's like considerably more organized. Quick aside, one thing that I have not seen a lot of people acknowledge is that one thing that the campaign showed us is that he definitely is dumber now than he was in 2016. He's much older, and it hasn't helped his brain. So, like, I'm just kind of curious about how he's going to handle these situations that he's putting himself in, because I think it's going to give us some indications of what the next 4 years might look like. Because it's not a super smooth path that he has for this first 2 years, and he's setting himself up for a lot of potential challenges. So I'm just paying close attention to how that shakes out. If he only has a 2 or 3 seat majority for 4 months, 5 months of that first 2 years, that'll probably end up being consequential.
Hmm. Very interesting. Well, you always provide such a needed perspective, Gerard, and I just really thank you so much for taking time to help to quell some of my anxieties. I fully agree. Let's allow ourselves to enjoy our holidays. Let's not allow anxiety to rack us and to ruin relationships or to ruin our ability to just enjoy our families, which I'm hearing a lot of stories of people disowning family members, walking away, severing relationships. You got to do what you got to do if there's real toxicity there. But, I have a lot of conservative family and friends, and I haven't cut anybody off yet. There's, in my estimation, if politics is all there is, if that is the only issue, a lot of people do what they do for various reasons. They may not fully understand the consequences of what they're doing. If I can use a quote by Jesus himself, he did say on the cross, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." That is part of the rationale that I use to extend a bit of mercy to some family members and to some friends who I truly believe do not know what they have done. And I feel like there are a lot of us who are going to feel the effects of what it is that we have allowed to transpire. But let's also remember that those people, the people who have voted or who did not vote, who stayed home, who cast a protest vote, or who voted for Trump, may not really know what they have done. And they are going to feel the ill effects of that. Many of them will feel the ill effects of that, or they will see that their family members have experienced that as well. We don't really understand or know exactly what we are going to experience in these next 4 years. And I know that because I was one of those uninformed voters who was just voting based upon the good guys, bad guys, red team, blue team. I didn't understand a whole lot about politics. And there are a lot of folks who are very unsophisticated where this stuff is concerned. And it's just vibes for a lot of people.
I do not like disparaging voters, and I don't say this to disparage voters, but most people vote for who they think their friends are going to vote for. Just like we are tribal animals. That's how we are. That's how we operate. So I think everybody should be responsible for their own personal relationships. I'm not telling anybody how to manage the Trump voter in their life. But if there was a good reason to have some grace, just remember that in 2030, it's unlikely that he'll be here, but your sister probably will be.
Exactly.
React accordingly.
Exactly. Yeah. And manage those relationships. We're certainly not suggesting that you not create boundaries where necessary, but I think that there can also be a lot of social pressure around, well, you need to cut them off. And what we were talking about at the beginning of this conversation, Gerard, is that sort of exacting expectation that if someone's views do not align with yours perfectly, well, then it's considered to be the moral response to then just cut them off and to have absolutely nothing to do with them. And I feel like we can all deal with the social pressure that comes from that. It's like, are you a real progressive? Do you really stand for what you stand for? And are you really embracing of your Black or LGBTQ friends or immigrants or whatever if you were to keep this Trump voter in your life? Yeah. I think we're all asking those kinds of questions right now, but I think you said it well. It's like, hey, this stuff is going to come and go. Your family's still going to be your family in 5 or 10
Tell
years.
Them how you feel,
yeah.
How you feel.
Do what you got to do.
We don't have to be the party of HR anymore. Tell them how you feel.
Well, thank you so much, Gerard, for your commentary, for your contribution. And I'm going to be paying attention. You're one of the voices that I will be paying attention to as we're moving forward to help me to parse out all of this. It's very, very overwhelming for me, I have to say, but I appreciate your calmness and your even temperament. And so that is helpful. Even if you're raging inside, I can't tell. So that's helpful.
Black in America.
So can you tell the folks where to find you online?
I'm Gerard.LeConte on TikTok. That's GerardLeconte. And you can find me at Gerard LeConte Politics on Threads and Instagram.
Well, thank you so much, Gerard, for joining me. Thank you all for joining me. We are going to get through this together day by day and week by week. Y'all, we've come a mighty long way. Let's not forget. And our ancestors did as well. They got through a whole lot of rough stuff. And through the spirit of what they went through, we can find the will and the strength to get through what is to come for us. So thank you all so much for being with me on this journey. And thank you to Gerard for joining me. And I will see you all next week. And until then, let's learn to shout.